My mom was naked. She had been in that bathroom for 16 hours. There was feces all over the room. She was covered in vomit. And I was so angry that I took a picture of her, because she always told me I lied and exaggerated. And I was like, when she wakes up for this, I'm going to show her.
Right.
I'm going to show her. And so I call an ambulance and I tell them that my mom's overdosed. Went to the hospital and she did not make it.
Let's be honest about recovery.
The rewards, the challenges.
Let's talk about our failures. We are flawed people, after all.
Let's challenge the stigmas that weigh us down.
Because while most of us are looked at, few of us are seen.
Let's talk about addiction.
And how Christ overcomes our weaknesses.
Because we are loved.
Because we are loved.
Because we are loved.
We are loved.
We are because loved. We are loved.
My name is Brittany Crabtree. I'm 35 years old, and I'm the eldest daughter of a mother who was addicted to opiates the majority of my life until we lost her in 2015 to a drug overdose. And I always promised myself growing up that way that I would never end up in addiction, and I did a very good job of that until I was in my 30s, and I found myself addicted to her drug of choice. And this is my story.
Welcome back to Jesus Loves Addicts. We're thrilled that you're here. In today's episode, we're going to hear part one of a two-part series of listening to Brittany's story. And Brittany's story offers unique insight into both sides of the addiction coin, so to speak, what the addict experiences, as well as what the family members of the addicted person experience. Brittany lived both. First, as the daughter of an addicted mother, and then years later, she ended up battling her own addiction. By the way, if you know anybody who you believe can benefit from these stories of really beauty from ashes, please tell them about Jesus Loves Addicts. We'd love to have them join us. And for those of you already enjoying the podcast, here's part one of Brittany's story.
Thinking back, I thought I had a really amazing childhood. I really did. I was very sheltered, very sheltered. We went to a church that was kind of backwoodsy and very strict about the things that you could and couldn't do. So there wasn't access to TVs and things like that. My dad pushed, and we got to watch Saturday morning cartoons after a while. But for the most part, it was just us as this little family.
Right.
And
I'm already going to interject a question.
Yes.
Because you just said your dad pushed. So was a stronghold to this rigid family your mother?
My mom grew up in a holiness United Pentecostal, but my whole family went to this one tiny, tiny little church. Okay. And my dad didn't grow up religious. Okay. So he went to that church as he was probably 17 when him and my mom got together. And so he did not like some of the rules. You couldn't have facial hair. You couldn't watch TV. You couldn't. My great-grandmother would not listen to the radio at all because she said she didn't know those people's life stories. And even if they were singing gospel music, who knew what you were letting into your house? Okay. So it was that kind of church.
Yeah.
So
when you say your whole family, you meant
my mom's side.
Your mom's whole side of the family
went to that church. We were the church. Okay. There were 2 or 3 families other than us, but it was us. Okay. And so, my dad really pushed for us. He was scared we were going to be weird. Mm-hmm. And so my dad really pushed that, no, they can watch cartoons. Please let them watch cartoons. And we went to that church until I was 13. Mm-hmm. And then we broke from that church. And it was devastating because that whole entire side of my family were upset to the point where they were like, well, now you're going to go to hell. But importantly, that's where I learned not to trust God. God was a God of punishment. And if you weren't perfect, he punished you terribly. So I lived in fear. And so did my mom, because leaving that church and that stability, it didn't matter what church we went to after that.
Right.
If it wasn't this one church, you would go to hell. And so my mom never found peace after that. We started a different church, and things kind of fell apart because our youth group at our church was just my family and a couple neighbors.
Yeah.
So we were very trustworthy. And my mom and dad allowed me to be with this other youth group. And they were just normal, like teenagers pushing boundaries and and being a little bit of a lot. And I was so sheltered, I didn't know what half the things they were talking about meant.
Yeah.
And there wasn't enough supervision. And I don't know exactly how honest you want me to be.
Very. Yeah. So it sounds like you went from one extreme to another.
One extreme to another extreme, where we didn't... Going to the movies was a sin. So I had no concept for anything to do with the outside world.
Right.
And I went from being this very innocent child to thinking I was going to hold hands with a boy, because that's all I had ever really witnessed,
Right.
to my virginity was taken by rape. And with that come so much shame.
Was that within the church group?
That was within the church. That was within that youth group. Because I didn't know what any of that was. And it sounds because I was 13 when that happened. And I think about 13-year-olds now, and they have a concept of what sex is.
Sure.
I had no idea when you said those words what they meant.
Yeah.
Well, being in that shelter, they also didn't have any transparent conversations.
No. And my mom had went from being very involved in my life, PTO president, like at the school all the time, to she had started to have surgeries at that point. She was growing tumors in her stomach, and they couldn't figure out why.
Right.
So she went from being very involved to I had no supervision and would come home and she would be recovering from surgery. And so I couldn't bring this to anybody and tell them, like, I don't understand. This happened. I feel really awful about it.
Yeah.
And by the time that it came out, my mother had started into her addiction. And so she was not nice to me about it at all.
So you went to her for support and it wasn't there.
She sort of tricked me into telling her, because I guess it had gotten around the youth group. And before I could tell her what happened, she said, "This happened, didn't it?" And I was like, "Yeah, Mom, but..." And she said, "You're a whore." And I was heartbroken, and then went to my best friend at that point, and she told me, "Virginity is a gift that you can give to your husband one time. Who will want you now?" And so I just completely...
Well, that became your belief.
Yeah, that became my belief.
Yeah. And it's so, one, I'm sorry you went through that. I mean, I know you've done your work and we're going to hear about that, but it's so heartbreaking on many levels, right? I mean, that's so absent of grace and understanding, right?
Yeah.
It's so, anyway, I'm sorry.
It was the beginning for me of... I was like a straight A student who had some self-esteem issues just because I was a chunky kid. I got made fun of a little bit, and I was the weird kid who wasn't allowed to wear shorts. I had to wear skirts down to my ankles and couldn't show my elbows kind of situation. And I had just started feeling like I was fitting in. I was wearing jeans and short sleeve shirts, and like it felt...
You felt like everybody else,
I
or
felt
what
like,
you thought they felt.
And then to have all of that sort of self-confidence taken, and it was just shame left. And knowing that I couldn't bring those things to my mother anymore, because her first response was that it was my fault.
She condemned you.
Yeah. And then she taught me to lie, because she told me, we cannot tell your father this. He'll never look at you the same. This will break his heart. And I was a daddy's girl. So that started me lying to my dad about things that happened and who I was as a person. So things with my mom got a lot worse. Before she passed away, because she did eventually die of an overdose in 2015. She had 32 surgeries.
Was it the medications, the pain medications that started her addiction?
It was.
Yeah. Okay.
It was. She wasn't a big drinker. She, occasionally would drink. But that's what started it, is every 8 weeks they would open her up because
grief.
She had a hysterectomy, and they come to find out years later, they had left a small little piece of an ovary that produced hormones, and it would grow in the place of where her ovaries were. So it would cause her tremendous pain. They would go in, they'd take it out.
Was it just you and your dad?
It was me and my dad and my little sister. She's 5 years younger than me. And so Dad would work off. He worked construction because the medical bills were a lot.
I'm sure.
So he was gone a lot.
Now, were you the oldest?
And so I was the oldest. It was my job to take care of
surrogate mom.
I was mom. I was husband and wife because Dad trusted me to tell him what was going on at home. But I was scared that if I told him how things had started to spiral at home, that he wouldn't come home. I just had this fear, like he'll just stay gone, like he will.
And then it would just be you.
And then it would just be me.
And you're how old at this point?
This was it started when I was 13. So she started having surgeries around the time that I had just had my 13th birthday. And so things started to deteriorate at home, and I wouldn't tell Dad that Mom was sleeping all the time. That she wasn't getting up to feed me and my sister. That our house had started to look like hoarders' houses, and that's not an exaggeration. And no family was really allowed in our home. My grandmother, my dad's mom, lived in an underground house built into a hill, and we lived on top of that hill, and she was not allowed in our home. So no one knew how bad the house was.
Was your dad not at home? Because you said you wouldn't tell him that. Was he living away, or is this just because of his work trips?
He worked
But
off.
he would come home on occasion?
He would come home on the weekends sometimes.
And would she have it cleaned up at that point?
We would have it more clean.
So he never saw the extent.
He didn't see the extent the majority of the time.
Okay.
And so when he would come home, it was because I hadn't done anything. My sister and I had run amok all week. What he didn't know is starting like Wednesday nights, me and my sister would start like really trying to pull it together, really trying to clean as much as we could. So what he would come home and be so upset about would be like the best that we could do for like days, trying our best.
At this time, was it still just medical and she was sleeping from that? Or did y'all know that it might be a problem?
I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
We didn't know until years later, like a couple years later, that it was actually her overtaking a ton of medicine. I just thought it was, this is what happens when you have surgery, I guess. You just have to stay in bed. You just have to sleep the majority of the time. But she would be up enough in front of others, like if we would go somewhere, that they would think she's perfectly fine to take care of us.
Right.
And so my dad felt comfortable going to work because I was old enough at that point to look after my sister. But it got to the point where he wouldn't know that she wouldn't buy us food. And no one would know that there wasn't groceries in the house. But we had one We had one grocery store in town that took checks. And at 14, I would put her in the passenger seat of the car. And I would drive us to town. And I would go in and shop. And I would forge a check. And I would pay for our groceries and bring them home. Because she just didn't. And that went on for years. And I just didn't tell anyone. And my sister, I was always very good at pretending that mom was fine. She would fall down or not be wearing clothes or be saying weird things. And I would tell my sister, this is just part of her being sick. She's fine. Everything's fine. Mom started having seizures from the amount of medicine she was taking and knocking holes in our walls from the seizures she was having. And my sister would be crying and I couldn't cry because if I did, my sister would panic.
Yeah.
So everything's fine. Mommy's fine. This is part of being sick. It's fine. And my sister got a little bit older and I was able to send her to her friend's house a lot.
Mm-hmm. But you were still there.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a moment to recognize a major podcast sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by America's Thrift Stores, your go-to option for decluttering and giving back. You have a closet bursting at the seams or a garage that's seen better days? We've got the perfect solution for you.
That's right. America's Thrift Stores makes it easy to clear out the clutter and make a positive impact in your community. Whether you are cleaning out your wardrobe, downsizing your living space, or just looking to give back, America's Thrift Stores has you covered.
And here's the best part. You've got options. Schedule a hassle-free home pickup, drop off your items at one of their convenient donation sites, or swing by an America's Thrift Store to donate in person. No matter which way you choose, you're making a difference.
Every donation you make to America's Thrift Stores directly benefits charities in your area, such as the Home of Grace and other fantastic organizations dedicated to helping those in need.
For example, donations made to America's Thrift Stores in southern Mississippi help the Home of Grace provide support and assistance to individuals facing drug and alcohol addiction. Your contributions make a real impact on their mission to provide freedom from addiction through Christ-centered recovery. So, not only are you decluttering your life, but you're also helping build a stronger and more supportive community.
It's truly a double blessing, so what are you waiting for? Clean out that closet, clear out that garage, and make a positive difference in your community by donating to America's Thrift Stores.
Visit America's Thrift Stores online to schedule a home pickup, locate a donation site near you, or get directions to one of their store locations.
America's Thrift Stores, where giving back never goes out of style.
I want to interject a question, and I'm sure it's probably a little early in the story to do this, but I'll forget if I don't now. And you said that your sister would cry, but you couldn't. And so one thing that I've noticed about you just in meeting you these last few minutes is, and you all may not know that yet, but you have this wonderful sense of humor, right? But clearly it's a double-edged sword, right? It's a good thing, but my guess is it's also a defense mechanism. Have you been able to cry as an adult, or is that still something that's difficult for you?
That took me a long time to get to that point because, and it was sort of an unspoken thing, but in my family, we're strong. We're strong, but I internalize that as strength is not breaking down, not crying. We are fine always.
Everything's good.
We're good.
Strength
always.
is the mask.
Strength is the mask.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't till a very long time later. And also my dad and I would battle. And the fight would be over if I cried. Oh, he's going to hate me saying this, but the fight would be over when I cried. And I took it as, well, he thinks he's won. So at like 14 or 15, because I couldn't express why I was angry, but I was angry. And so me and him butted heads a lot. And so I started refusing to cry. like to him about anything. So instead of the fight being over in like 10 minutes, it would just go. Me and him would just keep going. And my sister and my mom is like, what is happening? Just stop. But I refused to cry. Yeah. And I refused to let it be over because I was like, well, then he wins.
Why were you angry?
I was angry because, come to find out, I felt very abandoned. And I felt like I'm doing this all by myself. Yeah. And then he would come home and Mom would have kind of spun a story about how bad we were. And that's why the house was awful. And she had been so sick. And she's been up and doing all this stuff. And we're so ungrateful. So Dad, of course, would come home and be upset because he's worked so hard all week and sometimes 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Come home, the house is a mess, and his wife is upset. And so, of course, he comes to us and is like, why would you do this? What is wrong with you? Come on now.
You were going to feel like it really didn't matter. Like you had done all this, you had done the best you could.
Yeah.
And it still wasn't enough.
I'm like, I'm driving my sister to school underage. I'm driving to the elementary school to drop her off, and then I'm parking in the teacher's parking lot to catch my bus to go to the middle school. I'm doing everything.
But
and
you
then
weren't telling him that.
And it's like, I couldn't figure out why I was angry in the moment. But years later, I figured out it's because I felt like, I've done all this. Well, he didn't know I did all of this. Right? It was like, I felt like he should know. Yeah. I've held this together for us so that you could work. And you come home and you're angry with me. And I don't understand.
Yeah.
But it wasn't his fault because I didn't sit him down and tell him things are a mess and I'm scared all the time and I don't know what to do.
Right.
And I'm figuring it out as I go.
Well, it wasn't his fault, but it wasn't yours either.
No.
Right. At that age, you didn't know to do that. So, I mean, it's just one of the things that emerges in this dysfunction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it very much felt like my fault at that time. It felt like I couldn't hold things. Looking back and seeing kids now at 13 and 14, thinking about them watching someone who's 5 years younger, getting them ready for school, doing homework, doing all this stuff, while taking care of someone who's an addict and running a household, I'd be like, of course, you're not going to get it right. You're not going to parent this other child correctly. You're a child.
Right.
You're not going to run a household correctly. But to that kid, it feels like
it's the only option.
I'm a screw up. How can I not get this? But it forged this relationship with my father where I felt like his right hand. And it gave me a very big sense of pride that later on, when we all kind of realized collectively, oh no, this is addiction. My mother has a problem. It felt very much like we were partners, and I was going to help him as much as I could. And he was calling me to check in and how is your mom? And that made things so much worse with my mother because she felt very on the outside and attacked. And so then it started this cycle of her taking that out on me.
Well, and it reinforces your mother role / surrogate wife role, right? Yeah. Because there's this connection there that is still disallowing you to be a 13, 14-year-old, right?
Right.
Even when it felt good, even when it felt like, hey, I'm a part of something good now, it still was inhibiting you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I wasn't maturing in the way that I needed to. I wasn't doing the things that other kids were doing at that time. And so when I did start to make my mistakes, I made them a lot.
Yeah.
Really bad mistakes because I just didn't make the little ones all the way along, you know. It was hard. And then I still struggle with feelings of guilt when it comes to my sister because I'm not going to be upset about it. She's amazing and wonderful and everything. And sometimes I really wish that I could have known to just say something to somebody.
Yeah.
So that she and I could have a relationship where we're still as close as sisters, but to where she didn't grow up in that chaos that she did, because it's hard for her to feel safe. And that's why I carry a lot of guilt now that I have kind of stumbled into addiction myself. Like, I was her safe space.
Right.
And so I feel very guilty about taking that from her. Anyways.
Well, can I just ask, I don't want to turn this into a counseling session, but you obviously have some wisdom about the reality of that too, right? I know it feels like that. But if you just think about the statement you just made, that you took that from her, if you just pause for a second, do you believe that?
I know.
Yeah.
I 100% know that a lot was taken from me
Amen.
too.
Yeah.
And that I put a lot of responsibility on myself.
For sure. And so did the family.
Right. It feels like as an adult, because I didn't kind of spiral into addiction until I was in my 30s. And so it feels like I should have just known to make these different choices. I should have just known better. I saw where addiction led. Not just with my mother, but I worked for the coroner's office, and I saw these things, and I thought, but if you don't do the work and if you bury the things that happen, it's not strength.
Amen.
It's not strength to just smile and get through it, because I'm real good in a crisis, and I always have been.
I'm sure.
Because I was shaped to be.
That's right.
But most people have a decompression after the crisis. It doesn't mean you have to be hysterical within the crisis. But once you make it through whatever said crisis is, you're supposed to step back and take a little inventory.
Sure.
And allow yourself to have the emotions. And I didn't.
You did not do that.
I did not do that. And I just thought, well,
you were taking everybody else's inventory. Most importantly, maybe, and don't let me, but most importantly, maybe it seems like your sisters.
I'm very good at reading a room, especially when it comes to my sister. And when it came to my mother. Because I could see my sister start to get upset or start to look at things. And I'm like, look over here. Look over here. Don't pay attention to that. We're okay. Everything's okay. And with my mom, if I saw her get upset, it meant she was going to use more. And it meant that things were going to really get out of hand.
They were going to get even worse.
So I got to be very good at just her not saying a word, but me seeing the tension in her and trying to redirect that in some way. It didn't always work, especially as I got older, because the more mother role that I took, the more she resented me.
Sure.
And she would be very nice to me in front of people. And then we would get home and she would be very, very awful.
Because she resented that you took the place, but she also knew that she couldn't.
Yeah. I thought for years that my mom used because of me. Because there was always something wrong with what I did. And so I started to correlate that with, oh, she's high and I've done something. Because she can't stand me. There's something that I'm doing wrong, because I would see the way she would look at my sister. And it was different. She could, to me, outside looking in, it looked like she could connect with my sister. She couldn't with me, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And it wasn't until I was in recovery at Home of Grace that my counselor told me, and it was one of the things that has stuck with me. And she said, you saw your mom when she was at her best. And I did. My sister was too young. She doesn't remember mom being PTO president, being very active, being the person who was making dinners and doing the things. She remembers mom as an addict. And she said, you have very truth-filled eyes, your mom could see that you could see that she was slipping, that she was going away, that she was dropping each and every responsibility. And you were picking each and every one of them up. And she hated that, not you. And it broke something in me.
Yeah.
Because for years I just thought, it's me. It's me. Anyway. As a teenager, I met who would then be my husband. He's wonderful. We've been together for decades now. And he was my saving grace because he comes from kind of a dysfunctional family. His dad's in addiction. My mom was in addiction. And so we just kind of fit together. And so I was able to, my sister was older. She was kind of out of the house. I was able to go out and drink and do the things that kids kind of experiment with, but I kind of started doing them all at once. I still was the person who was over my mom's medication. Dad was still working off. So I was counting her pills because at that point I knew. And she wouldn't know, but I would find her pills and just count.
Were you the only one that knew, or was it?
My dad knew, and we were kind of in communication about it. She would go through periods where she would hold it together, make a lot of promises, have another surgery, completely spiral again. And so I got married and moved down the driveway, literally down the driveway. We called it Murray Hill because it was my grandmother, my dad, me. And so I was still keeping an eye on things.
Right.
My sister had a bedroom at my house. And so she was with me a lot.
Before we go any further, let's take a minute to address the man or the woman listening to today's episode and wishing for a better life. Or maybe addiction has completely overtaken a family member or a friend.
You are not alone. As you may know, the Jesus Loves Addicts podcast is produced by the Home of Grace, a Christ-centered addiction recovery program in South Mississippi with over 60 years of experience.
The Home of Grace has residential programs ranging from 30 days to 12 months. With 2 separate campuses for men and women, they are fully staffed with caring individuals who want nothing more than to guide you to a life of recovery.
Services include individual and group counseling, marriage and family counseling, classes, workshops, GED, and workforce training, all grounded in biblical principles.
And because of donations from the community, the cost of the program is incredibly affordable.
Thousands of alumni from all across the country can tell you there is no other program in the world quite like the Home of Grace.
If you want to start a new path to recovery, don't wait. Speak with their admissions specialist today. Visit homeofgrace.org or call 833-55-GRACE to talk with someone.
That's 833-55-GRACE. Call the Home of Grace today. I can't imagine that there was a part of you at this stage in the game that wanted to get as far away from this as possible. And yet I moved down at was that strictly just a dutiful act?
That was being scared. That was even at that point, I was scared to get too far because I never wanted it to fall to my sister to take care of my mom. Okay. And so, yes, my sister had a room at my house, but she didn't live with me per se.
Yeah.
She spent a lot of time at her friends' houses. She spent a lot of time at my house. She never had to be at home, if that makes sense. It was never, but on school nights, she was either at mom and dad's house or at my house. But a lot of the time she was at my house. I never wanted to be too far. My dad and mom decided to move to Florida, and I was newly married. And I looked at my husband and was like, we're moving to Florida. And he goes, no. What? No, No. And I said, I'm moving to Florida. You can move to Florida or you can stay here. But because I was not going to be separate from my sister. I just wasn't going to do that. If she had to go, I was going to go. And she was still underage, so I was going to be there. And so I did. And it was harder there. Mom got a lot worse there. A lot worse. And so for about a year.
Was your dad still working off?
That's what I was going to say. For about a year, Dad was at home. Dad and Quinn, we all lived together, which was a trip.
Did your husband ultimately move down there with
he
you?
moved.
Okay.
He moved with us.
That's Quinn?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me tell you something about Quinn. That boy is a wonderful man. Our life has not been perfect, but he has been in from day one. He was like, this is my family. This is part of me. Whatever you need, I'll be there. I won't always like it, but if you're doing it, I'm doing it. We'll go. And I'm so appreciative to him for sticking it out when he didn't have to, because he did not have to. But for about a year, they were able to be at home, and then they both started having to work away. Quinn and my father, because they work for the same construction company. So they both started to have to work away. And that's the worst that I had ever seen my mom. She deteriorated in a way and then told us it was because she had lesions on her brain, that she had went to the doctor. There was no drugs. It was just lesions. And I never know what's true when it comes to her medical stuff. I know that she had 3 back surgeries, 2 pacemaker surgeries, and that she had a ton of abdominal surgeries. But when it comes to the other stuff, at one point she had MS, but she doesn't. All these different diagnoses and reasons for having all of these pills. And the altered mental state, there's a reason for it, she would say. I don't know how true any of that was.
Yeah.
But it got a lot worse. She started leaving the house, and we couldn't find her because she's at Walmart for 4 hours. Come to find out, buying $400 worth of lunch meat for something at church that we didn't know about. It was very bad. It was very, very bad. And her and my dad were at it a lot because he was starting to get tired of it. It's been
It's been years.
It's been years. It's been years. And she never, until 2015, she never once admitted that she overtook her medicine, that she had a problem, anything.
Yeah.
We judged her so harshly all the time. I was trying to take her life from her. I was trying to steal her husband. I was trying to steal her child. I wanted to ruin her life.
Was there some sense at this time that your mom was starting to believe, it wasn't just, is she starting to lose touch with reality at this point? I mean, there's some things happening there.
She believed it.
Yeah. Okay.
She thoroughly believed that my father and I plotted all the time because we would speak so often. But it was about, well, how is she? What's going on? What do I need to do? Because he couldn't be there, Right.
Yeah.
But she still felt excluded.
But she felt excluded, and she felt that we plotted, and that I in particular was trying to remove her from her established role.
Yeah.
I call my sister, just as a small example, I've always called my sister baby, just because when I was 5 and they told me that I was going to have a sister, they said, and it's going to be your baby. And I took that literally. And from the time she came home, she was in my arms. That was my baby. And my mom thought it was cute.
Right.
Until I got to be about 16, 17. And then she started making little comments about it. And then by the time we got to Florida and I was married, if I called my sister baby, it was, see, you're not her mother. You're never going to be her mother. Okay. You should have a child of your own. And I wanted to, but I struggled to get pregnant. I'm so glad that I didn't have children back then. But I tried very hard.
A godsend,
to have a child because I always wanted to be a mom. Because I had my sister and I was like, this is amazing. And I'm going to do it right. You wait. I'll never be my mother. I will never, ever allow myself to be my mother.
So, Brittany, I'm going to use that as a springboard to jump ahead. I do, and I'm sorry, we're going to shift kind of abruptly because I want to get to your, where did your addiction start then? Because, I mean, this is, and certainly, boy, we see the roots of it, don't we? I mean, honestly, honestly, your story is answering that question. Your addiction has already started. You just haven't put a chemical to your lips yet, right?
Right.
So, in Florida, is this where your mother passes, or do you come back?
We come home. That was next. Like we literally come home, and my dad has had pretty much enough. Like he's had enough, and he tells my mom so. After a particularly bad bender where she was clean for about 3 weeks, and those were the best 3 weeks of my life. I hadn't seen her that way in forever. But she had a small stash of pills that we didn't know about. She took them. She was in like a borderline overdose. She slept for 3 days. And so I came to her house. We were finally living separately. We had bought us a little trailer, and we were living separately. And my dad called and was like, you've got to come. I've got to go to work. I've done my best with her, but I can't wake her up. She's fine. She just took too much. I need you to come. So I went, I stayed, fed her Ensure for 3 days because she wouldn't eat or drink. And my dad told her, this is it. If this happens again, like we're done. She packed up her stuff and went to Florida to have like a little spree, and my dad filed for divorce. And that was when my mom, and I don't know if she meant it or not, but she finally said, you know what, I do have a problem. I do, and I'm going to go to rehab. And she went for 30 days.
Was this all in 2015, do you know?
This was all in 2015.
Okay.
She went to rehab for 30 days. I drove her. I dropped her off. She was out for 30 days. And I was so proud of myself because I went to therapy. And I was so scared that I would be the cause of her to relapse after having that clean time. And so I went to therapy so that while she was gone, I was working on healthy boundaries. And that was the first time I'd ever done that. So when she was still in there, I got to talk to her, and I said, here's a list of things that I'm not going to allow in my life because I need to really start worrying about me. Yeah. I'm not going to be over your medicine anymore. I'm not going to allow you to be in my home if I see you and I think that you're high. If you relapse, I'm sorry. I can't do this with you.
Amen.
And I was so proud. And she came home, was clean for a month. And she came to my house one night after she said that she was going to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And I could see in her eyes that she had taken something. And so one of my things was, you can't come inside. So I sat out on the porch and I talked to her. She promised me she hadn't taken anything. She went home, and she and I argued on the phone. And then her roommate called, and I didn't answer because her roommate was a talker that she met in rehab and just was chatty. And I was, And so an hour and a half later, I listened to that voicemail, and it was this lady saying, your mom's been in the bathroom for 16 hours. She won't come out. I'm going to need you to come because if I call an ambulance, she's going to be really mad. So I went to her little rented place, and I opened the bathroom door, and I panicked at first, but I saw my mom move. And I immediately was so angry with her because my mom was naked. She had been in that bathroom for 16 hours. There was feces all over the room. She was covered in vomit. And I was so angry that I took a picture of her because she always told me I lied and exaggerated. And I was like, when she wakes up for this, I'm going to show her.
Right.
I'm going to show her. And so I call an ambulance and I tell them that my mom's overdosed. And I go back in that room and I notice that she's moving methodically. And that's when it hits me. She has a pacemaker, defibrillator, and it is just shocking her over and over again. And so I screamed for my husband because he was with me and he did CPR, and we went to the hospital and she did not make it. And I've never really been suicidal. I've been what they call passively suicidal, where I was so stressed out. I was like, I just hope I don't wake up tomorrow. But never actively.
Sure.
But after we buried my mom, my mission in life was over. My mission was to keep her alive. My sister had gotten married by this point. She was living 9 hours from me. My dad had started dating someone else. And I had my husband, but to me, I'm like, my husband is an independent person who could take care of himself. And I have failed. I let my mom die. And I very slowly started to spiral after that.
How old were you? Sorry.
No,
How old were you at this time?
2015, I would have been 25, 26.
And Brittany, I hope I know the answer to this question, but I just, you know, because you make these definitive statements, and I know coming from a background like that, there's probably still times that you wrestle with yourself. Do you know that the statement that you just made is not true?
Yes.
Okay.
Now I do.
Okay.
But for years,
That was your truth.
that was the truth that I lived by. If I hadn't have fought with my mom, if I would have just watched her medicine, if I would have just,
If you had just let her in.
if I would have just let her come inside, but I didn't, and she died.
Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us for part 1 of Brittany's story. Don't forget to tune in next week as we delve into part 2 of her story of redemption.